10 Things People Regret After Losing You. You think that title is for them, don't you? Like it's some little trophy you get to hold up in the mirror so you can admire the bruises you survived. So you can say, look, I was worth something after all. Look how they miss me now. Look how their hands shake when my name crawls into their throat. And I can see it, that tiny, almost embarrassing hope hiding behind your eyes. The one you pretend you don't have because you've been disappointed too many times to admit you still want to be chosen, still want to be seen, still want someone to stand up and say, I was wrong to treat you like a spare part in my life. You wear that hope like a bandage over a wound that never closes, and you call it dignity. You call it being over it. You call it moving on. But I know the truth. I know the little ritual you do when you're alone, replaying moments like their security footage, slowing them down, zooming in on the exact second someone looked away when you needed them to look closer, pausing on the exact second your mouth opened and then closed again because you decided your pain was too inconvenient to share, too messy, too likely to get you laughed at or ignored. You learn to swallow words until they turned into stones, and you tell yourself it's strength, but it's really training, the kind that teaches you how to disappear while still standing in the room, smiling like everything is fine while you quietly negotiate with your own heart not to crack in public. And the funny part is, people loved you best when you were shrinking, didn't they? When you were easy, when you were useful, when you made your suffering small enough to fit in their schedule, when you apologized for needing anything at all, when you said, it's okay, even when it wasn't, especially when it wasn't. And then one day you stopped offering yourself like free water to people who never learned to say thank you, and suddenly they called you cold, suddenly they called you changed, suddenly they acted like you were the problem because you stopped bleeding where they could drink. That's where the regrets start. Not the dramatic kind they post about, not the fake poetry, not the big speeches people give to look deep, but the private regrets, the ones that pinch them at 2:17 in the morning when the room is too quiet and there's no audience to perform for. They regret underestimating how heavy your absence would feel, because they thought you were permanent, like a wall in a house they could lean on forever, without ever asking if your foundation was cracking. They regret the way they treated your kindness like a service they were entitled to, like you were built to absorb their moods, their stress, their boredom, their loneliness, like you were a soft place to land that never needed rest. They regret the jokes they made when you were already bruised, the little humiliations they hid inside just playing, because deep down they knew you laughed along to survive, not because it was funny. They regret the times you asked for something simple, time, honesty, effort, and they acted like you were asking for their lungs, like you were demanding too much, like your needs were a personal attack. They regret ignoring the warning signs, the quiet ones, the way your energy changed, the way your replies got shorter, the way your eyes stopped begging, because you finally accepted what they kept proving. They regret not defending you when other people turned you into a story, a rumor, a punchline, because staying silent was easier than standing with you, and they chose easy. They regret choosing pride over apology, because they thought you'd come back anyway. They thought your forgiveness was automatic, like a subscription they could cancel and restart whenever they felt like it. They regret the way they kept you as an option instead of a priority, how they fed you crumbs and watched you pretend it was a meal. They regret waiting too long to reach out, because they believed time would pause for them, because they thought you would stay in that same emotional position, frozen, available, loyal, bruised, but obedient. And they regret realizing the final truth too late, that the version of you they miss is the version they helped destroy, and the person you became after surviving them is not someone they can access with a casual, hey, and a smiling emoji. They regret losing you because they finally understand you were the rare kind of person who stayed even while you were hurting. And when you left, when you finally left, even if you stayed physically but left emotionally, it exposed how empty their world really was. And you sit there and act like you're above it, like you don't care, like you're just numb. But you still count those regrets like coins, don't you? Still wonder if any of them are real. Still wonder if any of them mean you mattered. Still wonder if the pain was at least useful as evidence that you were not invisible. And that's where I lean in and smile. Because your biggest weakness isn't that you loved too much. It's that you keep looking for proof you were lovable from people who benefited most when you doubted it. And you call that hope, faith in people? But it's really hunger. It's thirst. It's the kind of loneliness that makes you accept a glass of dirty water because you're scared there won't be anything else to drink. You want a psychological autopsy? Fine. Let's peel you open without making it pretty. You didn't just get hurt, you got trained. You got trained by small rejections that happened so often you stopped calling them rejections and started calling them normal. You got trained by being the one who reaches out first, the one who checks in, the one who smooths things over, the one who says, "It's fine, I understand," while your own chest is begging you not to understand anymore. You got trained by the way people's attention came with conditions, the way love felt like a performance review, the way affection showed up when you were entertaining, helpful, agreeable, and vanished when you were human. So you built a version of yourself that could survive that climate, a version that anticipates, that overthinks, that apologizes early, that offers extra, that tries to pay for love in advance, like a person slipping cash into a stranger's hand just to be allowed to sit near the warmth. And the cruelest part is you're smart enough to know what you're doing, but not disciplined enough to stop doing it when the hunger hits. You tell yourself you're patient. Really, you're afraid. You tell yourself you're understanding. Really, you're tolerating. You tell yourself you're loyal. Really, you're attached to the idea that if you just endure long enough, someone will finally notice the cost. You learned to make yourself smaller because you thought it would make you easier to keep. You learned to laugh at what hurt you because you thought it would make you safer. You learned to say, "No problem," with a smile because you thought it would make you lovable. And then you got angry at yourself for feeling empty, as if emptiness was a moral failure instead of the predictable result of pouring and pouring and pouring into hands that never learned how to hold. Listen to me closely, because this is where people like you get confused. You think the worst thing that happened to you was being abandoned or betrayed or ignored. That's painful, sure. But the worst thing that happened to you was the quiet deal you made with yourself afterward. The deal where you said, "I will not ask for what I need if it risks losing someone." The deal where you said, "I will accept half love if it keeps the room from going silent." The deal where you said, "I will become low maintenance so nobody has an excuse to leave." That deal is what killed your voice, and your voice is where your power lives. You've been living like a person who thinks love is scarce and must be earned through suffering. You've been living like your worth is a debate and other people get the final vote. And because you live like that, you keep ending up around people who love debates, people who like having the upper hand, people who enjoy the subtle control of watching you chase their approval. They don't always look evil. Sometimes they look charming. Sometimes they look wounded. Sometimes they look like they need you, and that's what hooks you. Because you confuse being needed with being valued. You confuse intensity with intimacy. You confuse attention with love. You confuse someone's crisis with your calling. And when you finally crack, when you finally show the parts of you that are tired, the parts that are angry, the parts that are done, they act shocked, like you betrayed the contract, like you were supposed to be the strong one forever, like you were supposed to be their shelter without ever needing shelter yourself. That's when they begin rewriting the story. That's when your kindness becomes manipulation in their mouths. Your boundaries become attitude. Your silence becomes punishment. Your pain becomes drama. And you, this is the part that makes me tilt my head and study you like a puzzle. Sometimes you believe them. You take their version of you and you wear it like a sentence. You stand in front of your own reflection and you cross-examine yourself. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I deserve this. Maybe if I was better, they would have stayed. That's not humility. That's self-betrayal dressed up as accountability. Accountability is when you own your mistakes without turning yourself into a punching bag. Self-betrayal is when you punish yourself to spare other people the discomfort of being responsible. You've been doing that for a long time. It shows in the way you hesitate before you speak, like you're asking permission to exist. It shows in the way you try to predict moods, like you're walking through a house full of sleeping lions. It shows in the way you carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. Guilt from arguments you didn't start. Guilt from problems you didn't create. Guilt from other people's choices that you tried to prevent by sacrificing pieces of yourself. And still, you wonder why you feel hollow. Still, you wonder why you can't rest. Still, you wonder why compliments feel like lies. Still, you wonder why you're exhausted, even on days when nothing happens. Because your nervous system has been living in court for years, defending your right to be loved. And the judge is always someone else. That's what you need to grieve. Not just them, not just the relationship, not just the friendship, not just the respect you didn't get, but the years you spent negotiating for crumbs when you could have been building a table. And yeah, I said grieve, because grief is not only for death. Grief is for the version of you that kept hoping. Grief is for the time you gave away. Grief is for the apologies you offered for having a heartbeat. Grief is for the nights you lay there, phone glowing like a tiny moon, waiting for a message that would prove you mattered. And every minute that passed felt like a verdict. You remember those nights. Don't pretend you don't. You stared so hard at silence that silence started staring back, and you learned to translate it. If they cared, they would. If I mattered, they'd notice. If I was enough, they'd stay. Those translations carved grooves into you. And then, when someone finally did show up, when someone gave you a little warmth, you clung too quickly. Not because you were foolish, but because you were starving. Starving people don't ask if the meal is healthy. They just eat. That's not shameful. That's human. But you can't stay starving forever and call it love. I'm going to drag you through memory now, not to torture you, but to show you how your mind keeps lying to you in a friendly voice. You romanticize the beginning. You take the early sweetness, the early attention, the early promises, and you use them like a blanket over the later cold. You tell yourself, they weren't always like this, so maybe they can go back. You tell yourself, if I just say it the right way, if I just wait for the right time, if I just give them space, if I just prove I'm not a problem, they will remember who I am to them. No, they remember. They always remember. They just don't always care enough to act like it. And that's the part you avoid. Because it's cleaner to blame yourself than to accept that someone could see you clearly and still choose convenience over care. You'd rather believe you were unlovable than accept you were loved poorly. Because if you were loved poorly, then the world is unfair and you can't control it. If you were unlovable, then at least there's a project. Fix yourself, earn it, become better, become smaller, become easier, become perfect. Perfection is your little fantasy of safety. You think if you become flawless, nobody can hurt you. But flawless people are easy to use because they're desperate to stay flawless, desperate to avoid conflict, desperate to keep the peace. So they swallow disrespect and call it maturity. They accept neglect and call it independence. They endure betrayal and call it forgiveness. Forgiveness is not pretending the knife didn't cut. Forgiveness is acknowledging the wound without handing the blade back to the same hand. And here's another lie you tell yourself. You think walking away is cruelty. You think silence is cruelty. You think choosing yourself is cruelty. That's because you were taught that your value is measured by how much you can endure for others. You were praised for being strong when strong meant silent. You were admired for being patient when patient meant ignored. You were called good when good meant convenient. So now, when you set a boundary, your body reacts like you committed a crime. Your chest tightens. Your mind starts bargaining. You imagine them being angry. You imagine them leaving. You imagine being alone. And loneliness scares you because loneliness used to mean you were unwanted. Not because it actually means that, but because you were trained to interpret it that way. You didn't just fear being alone. You feared what being alone would confirm about you. But here's what they don't tell you in those little self-help slogans people toss around like candy. Being alone doesn't confirm you are unworthy. Being alone confirms you have standards. Being alone confirms you stopped auctioning your soul. Being alone confirms you can survive without an audience. And when people lose you, their regrets don't come from love alone. Sometimes they come from losing access, losing a listener, losing a fixer, losing a shield, losing someone who made their life smoother. That's why their regret can look like grief and still be selfish. That's why they show up when you're finally gone, not because they suddenly grew a heart, but because the gap you used to fill started echoing. They miss the way you absorbed their chaos. They miss the way you made them feel important. They miss the way your loyalty made them feel safe, even while they were careless. And this is where you have to be honest. Part of you likes being missed because it's the closest you felt to being valued. But being missed is not the same as being respected. Being wanted is not the same as being cared for. Being needed is not the same as being loved. I've watched people cry over someone they treated like trash, not because they feel remorse, but because they miss the convenience of that person's devotion. That's one of those regrets they don't confess out loud. They regret thinking you'd always be there to catch them, because now they have to face the consequences of their own behavior without your hands under the fall. Another regret? They regret the silence they used as a weapon. You know that silence, the kind that's not calm, not thoughtful, but calculated. The kind that says, suffer until you come back begging. They thought it would break you into obedience. It broke you into clarity. They regret the moment they realized their control tactics stopped working because you stopped reacting, stopped pleading, stopped explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. They regret the moment your eyes went flat and your voice went calm, because calm is not peace in someone like you. Calm is the door closing. They regret all the times you gave them one more chance, because every chance was a gift they treated like a chance. Refill. They regret the way they ignored your milestones and then acted offended when you stopped inviting them to celebrate. They regret the way they reduced you to your usefulness, because when you finally stopped being useful, they had to confront the fact that they never learned how to cherish. And the listener in you, the wounded one, still wants to believe at least one of them regrets the right things for the right reasons. Maybe someone does. I'm not denying that. But your recovery cannot depend on their sincerity. Your recovery has to depend on your discipline, on your willingness to tell yourself the truth, even when it stings. The truth is, you kept teaching people how to treat you by what you tolerated. The truth is, you stayed in rooms that made you small because leaving felt like failure. The truth is, you let apologies replace change because you wanted the story to end nicely. The truth is, you sometimes confused suffering with loyalty and called it noble. It wasn't noble. It was expensive. And you paid in sleep, in self-respect, in joy, in the ability to relax, in the ability to trust your own instincts. Your instincts were screaming long before you left. You just kept turning the volume down. You told yourself you were being dramatic. You told yourself you were overthinking. You told yourself you should be grateful. Gratitude is not a gag. Gratitude does not require you to accept harm. And I'm telling you now, face to face, close enough that you can feel every syllable like a fingertip on your bruises. You cannot heal while you keep protecting the people who hurt you from the consequences of what they did. You cannot rebuild while you keep rewriting your own pain into something more convenient for them to digest. Now watch how the rebuild starts. Because it doesn't start with motivation. It starts with disgust. Not disgust at them, at least not yet, but disgust at the old pattern. The part of you that kept begging for proof. The part of you that kept accepting the bare minimum and calling it something. The part of you that kept turning your own needs into a shameful secret. That part has to die. And I don't mean in some dramatic, self-destructive way. Don't twist my words. I mean it has to retire. It has to be fired. It has to be replaced with something colder and steadier. Self-mastery. Self-mastery is not about being hard. It's about being clear. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't need to shout to be taken seriously because your actions are consistent. It's about building a spine that does not bend every time someone with a loud personality walks into the room. It's about learning the difference between love that nourishes and love that drains, and choosing nourishment even when drainage feels familiar. Familiar pain is seductive. You know that. Familiar pain is like an old neighborhood. It might be dangerous, but you know the streets. Healthy love can feel suspicious to someone who's been trained to expect conditions. When someone treats you well, you start scanning for the trick. When someone is consistent, you wait for the drop. When someone respects you, you wonder what they want. That's not intuition. That's trauma pretending to be wisdom. Wisdom is quieter. Wisdom says, I will observe. I will not rush. I will not attach my identity to being chosen. I will not hand over my peace to someone who hasn't earned access. And earning access is not about grand gestures. It's about small consistency. It's about showing up when it's inconvenient. It's about speaking with honesty even when the truth makes them look bad. It's about defending you when you're not in the room. It's about apologizing with changed behavior, not with pretty words. You're going to rebuild by becoming allergic to excuses, especially your own. Because you've got a collection of excuses you use like soft pillows. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're stressed, maybe they don't mean it, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe I'm asking for too much. Those excuses kept you in cages with the door open. The rebuild is you walking out. And it's going to feel wrong at first, because freedom feels wrong to someone who's used to negotiating for air. You'll feel guilty, you'll feel selfish, you'll feel cruel. That's the withdrawal. That's the old dependency leaving your body. Let it leave. Let it ache. Let it cry. Let it shake. And then get up anyway. Discipline isn't a mood. Discipline is a decision you repeat when your feelings throw a tantrum. You're going to rebuild by setting standards and enforcing them, not with anger, not with speeches, but with distance. Distance is the language people understand when words have failed. You're going to rebuild by becoming consistent with yourself, by keeping promises to yourself even when nobody claps. You're going to rebuild by stopping the habit of checking your worth through someone else's attention. Attention is cheap. Integrity is rare. You're going to rebuild by learning that silence does not mean you lost. Sometimes silence means you refuse to fight in a circus. And you love a circus, don't you? Not because you're childish, but because chaos feels like home. Chaos gives you a role. Chaos lets you be the fixer, the mediator, the one who calms the storm, and being needed makes you feel real. But the cost is you never get to be calm yourself. You never get to be held. You never get to just exist without proving your value. So the rebuild is learning to live without the role. That's terrifying. Because if you're not the helper, who are you? If you're not the loyal one, what are you? If you're not the one who stays, what do you have to offer? You have you. That's the answer you've been avoiding. You have your mind. You have your time. You have your dignity. You have the ability to choose your next move instead of repeating the last wound. And when you finally embody that, you'll notice something sharp and almost funny. The people who used to keep you close start getting uncomfortable. They'll test you. They'll throw little hooks into the water to see if you still bite. They'll send messages that pretend nothing happened. They'll make jokes about how serious you've become. They'll accuse you of changing. They'll act like your growth is an insult. That's one more regret they'll carry later, that they mocked your evolution because it reminded them of their stagnation. Let them regret it. Don't collect their regret like candy. Don't use it as proof. Use it as confirmation that your boundary is working. The point isn't to punish them. The point is to protect you. And protection is not hatred. Protection is love with a backbone. Protection is choosing not to place your heart in hands that have a history of squeezing. Protection is understanding that you can forgive someone and still decide they are not safe. You can wish them well and still walk away. You can remember the good and still refuse the pattern. And here's the cold truth that will set you free if you can stomach it. Not everyone deserves the best of you. Not everyone deserves access to your softness. Not everyone deserves the version of you that stays late, that listens, that cares, that gives. Your softness is not a public resource. It's sacred, quietly, practically sacred, because it costs you something. So you start treating it like it costs. You start charging for access in the only currency that matters: respect, consistency, effort, accountability. If they can't pay, they don't get in. Simple. And you, yes, you, stop apologizing for having that door. And when the room gets quiet after you stop chasing, that's when the last transformation happens. The one you've been afraid of because it feels like standing on the edge of a roof, looking down at emptiness. You stop needing an audience to validate your pain. You stop telling your story to people who only listen so they can judge. You stop explaining your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. You stop offering your wounds as evidence in a trial where the verdict was decided before you spoke. You learn to sit with your own mind without scrambling for distractions. That's not easy for someone like you, because your mind is loud and it drags up memories like they're bodies in a river. It shows you the moment you trusted the wrong person. It shows you the message you sent that never got a reply. It shows you the apology you offered that wasn't deserved. It shows you the day you smiled in public and then cried in private, quiet so nobody would hear. It shows you the way you were treated like you were replaceable, and you believed it for a while, because being replaceable was less painful than believing someone chose to lose you. But here's the thing about being replaced. It does not define your value. It defines their capacity. People replace what they do not know how to cherish. People discard what requires responsibility. People trade depth for convenience because depth demands honesty, and honesty demands change. That's why some of them will always regret losing you. Because losing you was the moment the world stopped being padded. Losing you was the moment their excuses stopped working. Losing you was the moment they realized they had been living off your patience like it was a power source. And yes, sometimes they'll come back, not with remorse, but with nostalgia. Nostalgia is dangerous. Nostalgia is a liar that wears perfume. It will show you highlights and hide the bruises. It will whisper, maybe this time, maybe now, maybe they learned. Sometimes people learn. Often they don't. Your job is not to gamble your peace to find out. Your job is to become so anchored in yourself that their return or their absence doesn't move you like a storm moves a paper cup. You become heavy. You become grounded. You become a person who can miss someone without abandoning yourself for them. And that's where your true strength starts. Not in rage, not in revenge, not in showing them what they lost, but in refusing to be the kind of person who needs to be mourned in order to be valued. You will value yourself while you are still here. You will speak your needs without apologizing for having them. You will walk away when the pattern shows its teeth. You will stop calling it love when it only exists when you are useful. You will stop negotiating with disrespect. You will stop giving your tenderness to people who treat it like a weakness. You will stop mistaking endurance for destiny. Endurance is not staying in harm. Endurance is surviving it and refusing to return. Endurance is waking up and building anyway, even when your chest feels like it's full of wet cement. Endurance is letting the wound teach you, not trap you. Endurance is choosing self-mastery when your old habits beg you to crawl back for familiar pain. You don't get to disappear. Not into bitterness, not into numbness, not into fantasies about being saved. You stay. You breathe. You face what happened without turning it into a shrine. You use it like a tool. You let it sharpen your discernment. You let it strengthen your boundaries. You let it teach you what you will never tolerate again. And when the nights come, because they will, and the loneliness tries to convince you that any company is better than silence, you remember this. Silence is only empty when you have nothing inside you. Fill yourself. Fill yourself with routine. Fill yourself with purpose. Fill yourself with principles that don't wobble when someone smiles at you. Fill yourself with the kind of dignity that doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. And then, when the world is quiet and you're finally alone with your own heartbeat, you will realize the most brutal, liberating truth of all. The moment you stopped begging to be chosen was the moment you chose yourself. And that choice, cold, calm, unromantic, turns every past humiliation into fuel, turns every regret into a lesson, turns every long silence into a spine, until even the memory of them can't pull you apart anymore. Until your pain becomes information instead of a prison. until the room can go completely still and you don't panic. You don't reach for crumbs. You don't reach for noise. You don't reach for a hand that used to drop you. You just sit there, steady, and the silence stops feeling like abandonment and starts feeling like strength. And that strength, the kind that doesn't need witnesses, starts doing something strange to you. Something almost unsettling at first, because you're used to pain being loud and obvious. You're used to suffering having a soundtrack. You're used to your heart making a scene when it bleeds. But real strength is quiet. And quiet is where your mind finally has no excuses to hide behind. You'll sit there and you'll notice the itch, the twitch in your fingers, the urge to reach out, to check, to peek at what they're doing, to measure your value against their new smiles, to compare your slow healing to their fast distractions. And you'll have to face a humiliating little truth. Part of you doesn't just miss them. Part of you misses the chase, misses the tension, misses the feeling of being almost chosen, because almost kept you moving, kept you hoping, kept you alive in that frantic way people mistake for love. You know what almost is? It's a leash made out of promises that never materialize. It's a slot machine you keep feeding because once in a while the lights flash and you feel seen. And your brain, that brilliant little liar, calls that connection instead of calling it what it is, conditioning. And that's why their regrets can haunt you even after you leave. Because you're still carrying the habit of waiting for proof, still carrying the habit of turning yourself into a question mark, still carrying the habit of needing someone else to confirm you weren't crazy for wanting basic respect. But I'm not here to pat your head and tell you you're special. I'm here to pull the last hook out of your skin. And hooks hurt when they come out, because they're designed to. You want to know what people regret after losing you, that they will never admit, not even to themselves, not in words they can hear without choking. They regret how easy it was to make you doubt yourself, because it gave them power without effort. They regret how they could be careless and you'd still be careful. They regret how you made their mess feel manageable because you carried shame that was supposed to be theirs. They regret how you listened, really listened, the way you caught the small tremor in their voice, the way you noticed what they didn't say, the way you read their silence like it was a confession. And they regret it because the next person they meet will hear their words but not their meaning. Will see their surface, but not their cracks. And for the first time, they'll feel lonely inside a conversation. They regret the mirror you were, because you held up their behavior without screaming, just by being consistent, just by being sincere. And your sincerity made their games look cheap. They regret the way you offered them a safe place to be honest, because now honesty will cost them something, and they're not used to paying. They regret how you forgave, because your forgiveness trained them to believe consequences were optional. And when you left, consequences finally introduced themselves like a stranger at the door, with a calm face and heavy hands. They regret the look on your face the last time, not the angry look, not the crying look, the other one. The one that happens when hope shuts off, when the light behind your eyes goes from begging to observing. Because that look is the end of their influence. And people who live off influence panic when they lose it. They regret telling themselves you were replaceable, because now they have to live with the insult echoing back at them every time they realize the replacement laughs at their jokes but doesn't understand their soul. Every time they realize the new company is noise, not depth. They regret the way they treated your loyalty like a weakness, because loyalty like yours is a rare currency, and they spent it like loose change. And you can feel those regrets like phantom hands trying to pull you back, because you want justice, you want acknowledgement, you want the universe to stamp your pain with a seal that says validated. And I understand that hunger, I do, because you were denied something basic, to be taken seriously without having to collapse first. But if you keep needing their regret to feel whole, you'll be chained to them even while you're walking away. You'll be carrying their absence like a backpack full of rocks and calling it memory. You'll keep checking the rearview mirror while you're trying to drive forward, and you will crash into the same kind of wall again, just with a different face painted on it. So here's the next cut, sharp and clean. Their regret is not your medicine. Their regret is not your closure. Their regret is not your proof. Your proof is that you're still here, breathing, thinking, building, even after being treated like you were easy to lose. Your closure is your decision to stop reopening the wound for one more look. Your medicine is discipline, not drama. Discipline that doesn't argue with your emotions, but doesn't obey them either. Because the truth is, you don't just have wounds from them. You have wounds from you. From the way you abandoned yourself repeatedly to keep other people comfortable. From the way you betrayed your own instincts because you didn't trust yourself to be right. From the way you accepted disrespect and then tried to scrub the stain off your dignity by working harder, loving harder, giving more. You can't give your way out of being undervalued. You can't sacrifice your way into being respected. You can't explain your way into someone's empathy if their empathy is asleep on purpose. And I can tell you're tired. Not tired like you need a nap. Tired like your spirit has been carrying a weight it was never designed to carry. Tired like you've been walking around with a silent question lodged in your chest. What is wrong with me? And every time someone leaves, that question grows teeth. Nothing is wrong with you that requires you to be punished for existing. But there is something in you that needs training, and that's different. You need to train your standards until they become muscle memory. You need to train your mouth to speak before resentment rots your kindness. You need to train your eyes to see patterns instead of excuses. You need to train your hands not to reach for people who only touch you when it benefits them. Because you know what your real addiction is? Not them. Certainty. You were addicted to the idea that if you could just secure someone's loyalty, you'd finally be safe, finally relax, finally stop feeling like you're one mistake away from being left. But safety doesn't come from securing other people. Safety comes from securing yourself, from becoming a person who knows in your bones that you can survive loss without losing your identity. And that's why the rebuild has to go deeper than be confident, because confidence is a mood. It rises and falls. It depends on results. It depends on compliments. It depends on your reflection on a good day. Self-respect is not a mood, it's a law. It's something you enforce especially on your worst day. Self-respect is what stops you from crawling back to a familiar cage just because the outside air feels cold. And I know you. You've done that crawl before. Not always physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes through a message you didn't need to send, sometimes through a conversation you didn't need to reopen, sometimes through just checking in when you were really checking if you still mattered, checking if the door was still unlocked, checking if you could still be wanted without being valued. And every time you did, you paid a tax, a little tax on your dignity, and those taxes add up until one day you wake up and you can't recognize yourself because you've been buying temporary comfort with long-term self-betrayal. So we're going to talk about debt, because your life has been full of invisible debts. The debt of swallowed anger, the debt of unsaid needs, the debt of apologies you gave to keep peace, the debt of nights you lost to overthinking, the debt of time you spent trying to understand people who refused to understand you. Debts don't disappear because you ignore them. They collect interest, and the interest is anxiety. The interest is exhaustion. The interest is bitterness. The interest is that hollow feeling you get when someone says, "You're so strong," and you want to scream because you didn't choose strength, you chose survival. Paying the debt looks boring from the outside, and that's why most people don't do it, because boring doesn't get applause. Paying the debt looks like waking up and doing the small things you promised yourself you'd do, even when you don't feel like it. It looks like eating properly, sleeping properly, moving your body, cleaning your space, reading something that sharpens your mind, writing down what you feel so your feelings stop controlling you from the shadows. It looks like not responding immediately when someone tries to pull you into old chaos. It looks like pausing and asking yourself, am I doing this because it's right or because it's familiar? Am I speaking because I'm honest or because I'm afraid of silence? Am I giving because I want to or because I'm trying to earn a place? And you might hate those questions at first because they expose you. They leave you with nowhere to hide. But that's the point. You've been hiding behind, "I'm just a caring person too." Avoid admitting you were terrified of being left. Caring isn't the problem. The lack of boundaries was. Love wasn't the problem. The absence of self-respect was. Loyalty wasn't the problem. The loyalty without reciprocity was. And once you start paying the debt, your nervous system will scream, because it will interpret calm as danger, because calm is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar used to mean you were walking into something you didn't understand. You'll feel restless, you'll feel empty, you'll feel like you're missing something, and that something will tempt you to go find a little chaos, just to feel alive again. This is where most people relapse into old patterns, not because they're weak, but because they confuse intensity with meaning. You must learn that peace feels quiet, and quiet can feel like emptiness until you fill it with purpose. Purpose doesn't have to be grand, it just has to be real. It can be your craft, your work, your learning, your family, your responsibilities, your health, your character. Purpose is what makes silence feel like a sanctuary instead of a punishment. Because you've been punished with silence before, haven't you? Silent treatments, unanswered messages, rooms where your pain was met with blank stares, people who vanished when you needed them. So silence became a threat to you, like it meant you were unwanted. But silence in your own control is different. Silence you choose is power. Silence you cultivate is clarity. Silence you live in on purpose is where you can finally hear your own intuition again, that voice you kept drowning out with other people's opinions. And when your intuition comes back, it's not dramatic. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It simply points. This is safe. This is not. This is honest. This is performance. This is respect. This is convenience. And the more you listen, the more you'll start noticing the early signs you used to ignore. The way someone jokes at your expense to test how much you'll tolerate. The way someone makes you feel like you're asking for too much when you ask for basics. The way someone only reaches out when they want something. The way someone avoids accountability with charm. The way someone becomes vague when you ask for clarity. Those signs used to be background noise to you because you were trained to adapt, trained to rationalize, trained to keep the connection at any cost. Now, those signs will feel like alarms, not because you're paranoid, but because you're awake. And being awake is painful at first, because you realize how many times you talked yourself out of what you knew. You'll remember that moment you felt something was off, and you ignored it. You'll remember that conversation where you almost spoke up and then decided not to. You'll remember the time you caught a lie, but let it slide because you didn't want conflict. You'll remember all the little betrayals you forgave because you were afraid of what leaving would say about you. And you'll want to hit yourself with regret for being stupid. But you weren't stupid. You were hungry. You were hopeful. You were trying to survive in the only way you knew. And you did survive. The upgrade now is learning to survive without self-abandonment. And yes, people will regret losing you more as you become that version of yourself. Because the version of you they had access to was pliable. It could be pulled and shaped and guilted and coaxed into staying. The new version of you is not cruel, but it is solid. And solid people are hard to manipulate. Solid people don't argue with disrespect. They step away from it. Solid people don't chase closure from someone who refuses accountability. They create closure through their own standards. Solid people don't beg for love. They accept love that arrives with integrity. And integrity is what you're building. And it will feel lonely at times because integrity narrows your circle. It filters out the people who only liked you when you were easy. You will lose some people simply because you stopped being available for nonsense, and they will call that you changed. But what they mean is, you stopped making my life easier. Let them talk. Their mouths are not your mirror. And then comes the hardest part. The part you don't like admitting because it makes you feel exposed. You're going to have to forgive yourself for staying so long. Not forgive like excuse, forgive like release. You're going to have to stop beating yourself up for not leaving earlier, because that self-attack keeps you stuck in the same emotional loop as the relationship did. Proving, apologizing, punishing yourself to earn peace. You don't earn peace by punishing yourself. You earn peace by learning. You say, I see what I did. I see why I did it. And I will not do it again. That's forgiveness with teeth. And once you start doing that, you'll notice something else. The memory of them will try to change shape. Your mind will start painting them as a villain or as a saint, depending on the day, because your brain likes simple stories. But real healing is holding complexity without letting complexity become an excuse. You can admit they had good moments without denying the pattern that hurt you. You can admit you loved them without letting love become a reason to return. You can admit you miss them without letting missing become a command. Feelings are weather, not law. You can feel rain without moving into the storm. You can feel wind